Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Matt Rhule, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, getting set to kick off spring practice in the month of March. I want to talk about 5 storylines, 5 questions that I want to see answered during spring practice for this Nebraska program. And you look at, and this is probably one of the most exciting off seasons we've had for this Nebraska program, right? And it obviously starts with 5-star Dylan Raiola coming in, beginning his Cornhusker career, but Matt Rhule going into year 2, probably the healthiest this roster and depth chart has been in a very long time for Nebraska. The combination of young talent coming through the pipes and the combination of veteran guys that are coming back for one last year at Nebraska. This is a very healthy depth chart. You're going to see a lot of healthy competition in spring practice. I want to talk about some of those position rooms that we're going to be monitoring as spring practice plays out. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. A massive shout out to the Nebraska fans. It's no secret. I love talking about this program. I love what Matt Rhule is doing in this program, whether we're talking high school recruiting, transfer portal updates, position deep dives. You guys continue to show a ton of love, a ton of support to the boys. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. Now, we're going to talk about that quarterback position, right? We've talked about it a lot during the last couple of weeks. We're going to talk a lot about it during spring practice. I want to talk about the position group that I probably have the most questions heading into spring practice, and that is that linebacker spot. You lose 2 veteran linebackers that played a ton of football for Nebraska over the last couple of years, and that's probably the position group that you're looking at and saying, I don't know how that depth chart shakes out. And that's not something you can say for the rest of this roster. You kind of have a feel of what a lot of other position groups are going to look like. That linebacker spot, you're not so sure, right? You start off with a guy like John Bullock, who just provides you that really high floor. Like, John Bullock and what he brings to the table, really good against the run, pretty sure tackler. What I think excites me about this group is some of the other names that I kind of would label as some wild cards. Right, Stephon Thompson leading off, a guy that you go back to the Syracuse film when he was coached under Tony White. Tony White used him in a ton of different ways at Syracuse. You saw him play that off-ball linebacker role. You saw him play as an edge rusher, a guy that is kind of a jack of all trades, a chess piece on that defense. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him play a lot of off-ball linebacker, sending him on a lot of blitzes, because that's probably what his skill set fits best. But also probably what this Nebraska defense needs the most, right? You kind of feel good about that jack spot with MJ Sherman, Prince Will, you taking a step going into year 2. The off-ball linebacker spot is probably the question that I'm looking at, and I think Stephon Thompson can certainly come in and fill that. Another guy to take a look at, Javin Wright, Mekhi Abar, 2 guys that I think have a lot of potential, right? You talk about ceiling. I think Javin Wright has an extremely high ceiling. He's my brother's favorite player on this Nebraska defense. I'm most excited to hear what the spring practice notes say, where these guys are getting used, and who's really emerging out of this position group. Because, again, that's probably one of those position groups that you have the most, I don't know if you'd say concerns, but question marks heading into spring practice. The next position group I want to talk about, and I think is just kind of flying under the radar because of the nature of having 5-star Dylan Raiola at the quarterback spot, is this wide receiver room. And I love what Matt Rhule did in the offseason. And I more love how this wide receiver room is constructed. You look at how you want a college position room to be structured. You want your high floor guys, the guys that bring production, proven production to the table. You bring in and get a guy like Jamal Banks, who is one of the better possession receivers that we saw in the ACC last year at Wake Forest. You bring in a guy like Isaiah Nayor, who, going back to his time at Wyoming, was just a deep threat, a guy that can work down the field. He's obviously coming back from an injury. Those 2 guys have played a lot of college football. They've produced at the college football level. You feel good about the floor those guys give the wide receiver room, where you go back to last year and all the injuries that they endured. You didn't really have a floor. You were kind of throwing out true freshmen into the fire, and the wide receiver play wasn't that great because these guys weren't quite ready to play as much as they were in 2023. Obviously, the quarterback situation played a role too. But then going back to, you have your high floor guys, but then you have extremely high ceiling guys, right? Malachi Coleman, a guy that we're all extremely excited about going into year 2. We kind of knew he was going to be a year 2 guy anyways, a guy that played both ways, didn't play a ton of wide receiver at the high school level, but has all the physical traits that you want in an elite wide receiver at the college football level. You sprinkle in guys like Jalen Lloyd. You sprinkle in, I mean, you kind of look at this, Doss, Bell, a lot of high upside guys that are going into year two that could really provide some juice to this Nebraska wide receiver room. And I don't think that was talked about enough. Yes, the quarterback play was not nearly good enough in 2023, but that wide receiver play left a lot to be desired as well. And I think this wide receiver room takes a massive step in the right direction heading into 2024. And I'm going to be keyed in on some of those young wide receivers and listening to what their what the development looks like in that wide receiver room. Next conversation I want to have before we get to the quarterback conversation, because again, you talk about getting Dylan Raiola all the tools that he needs to have success year one. Got to talk about the offensive line, which the Nebraska fans that have been listening for the last couple months know one of the reasons I'm so excited about Matt Rhule and his tenure at Nebraska is you saw that offensive line get significantly better through that 12 weeks of the season while enduring a lot of injuries up front, right? They trotted out against Minnesota. It did not look good. It didn't look good for the first half of that season. I thought it looked significantly better at the end of that 2023 year. And then you look at who you have coming back, you feel pretty good about your tackles in Teddy and Bryce, right? And I think that's where it starts. I think you feel good about that. Turner Cochran, he's a guy that I think maybe competes for a guard spot, is maybe your reserve tackle. I don't know if you see him starting in 2024 unless he made significant improvements coming back from that injury. Then you look on the inside, and to me, it's about as solid as it gets, right? Ben Scott, veteran center from Arizona State, played solid football for Nebraska in 2023. I think it's huge for Dylan Raiola if he wins that starting spot to have a veteran center like Ben Scott. Justin Evans-Jenkins, probably my favorite player on this Nebraska offensive line. I thought he looked phenomenal for Nebraska in 2023. Then you bring in Micah Mazuka coming from Florida, who has played a lot of good football during his time at Baylor and Florida. I think the floor and ceiling for that Nebraska offensive line is also significantly better than we saw in 2023, and that all culminates in the quarterback conversation. That's what excites me the most about Dylan Raiola coming in is you have this wide receiver room in a much better place. You have this offensive line in a much better place. And I think that makes you more comfortable about potentially having a true freshman start at quarterback for this Nebraska team in 2024. Now, we know Dylan Raiola has to come in and earn it. What I'm most interested is in two things. One, how many reps is Dylan getting immediately with that number one offense? And then number two, how are you using Henrik Harburg, a guy that I think we could see them use some wildcat looks, some packages for Henrik to use his athleticism, his ability to run the football. And I think what that allows you to do is add some wrinkles into this offense with the true freshman quarterback. It's hard to add wrinkles in with the true freshman quarterback normally, but if you have the ability to bring in Henrik Harburg, give him some wildcat looks, let him run the football, let him be that physical ball carrier that we all loved in 2023, I think that would allow Nebraska's offense to add some wrinkles with the true freshman quarterback. And again, what I'm most excited for about Dylan Raiola is not only what he can do with his arm, right? We all know he has one of the more talented arms that we'll see in college football, but between the years, we've talked about this a lot. Coming from Buford, played in not a high school offense, right? He was taking snaps under center. He was organizing protections. They put a lot on his plate at Buford, and I think that sets him up to translate to the college football landscape rather quickly, where you see a lot of other talented quarterbacks have to really make some strides between the ears at that quarterback position. I think Dylan Raiola will have a little bit less on his plate. And obviously, I don't want to just throw away Danny Kaelin, who is extremely talented. I was really fired up when it was only Danny Kaelin in that 2024 class. Ton of talent, ton of arm talent. I think this quarterback room is undoubtedly in a better spot than we've seen in the last couple of years for Nebraska. Now, the last big storyline for me, and this is more the exciting storyline. I have two stories. I'm going to cheat here and add 6 storylines for me. The thing I'm most excited for on the defensive line, and a very similar conversation that you have with that wide receiver room, is you have guys like Ty Robinson and Nash coming back who we know what they're able to do on that defensive line. What does the development look like from a couple of true freshmen that we saw some really good things from 2023, right? Prince Will Yu, a guy that I thought was going to need a redshirt year, get that body right. He played some really good football as a true freshman, along the line of scrimmage. Cam Lenhart also looked good. What does that development look like for these two guys going into year two? That's normally when you start to see defensive linemen hit their stride. Year two, year three, once they get in off season, putting on that right weight, kind of getting that grown man strength. I am really excited about what Prince Will You, what Cam Lenhart, what Riley Van Poppel can look like going into year two of their college careers. And make no mistake about it, this is what Matt Rhule is going to build this program on, and that is development. Getting these guys with the traits out of high school, getting them developed, and having it pay off year two, year three, year four. For guys like Prince Will You and Cam Lenhart, the special talents, I think you could see it pay off in that 2024 season going into year two. Now, the last storyline I want to talk about, and this is, again, just more of an exciting storyline to monitor, is what is that running back room going to look like? Many of you guys know I'm a massive Gabe Ervin fan. If you can keep Gabe Ervin healthy, I think he was so impressive until he went down with the injury. And that's kind of been the story of his career. And I think a lot of Nebraska fans are kind of in my boat saying, if we see Gabe Ervin put together 12, 13 games of healthy play, that is exactly how Nebraska wants to run the football. Now, I don't think Gabe Ervin or Ramir Johnson will be participating in spring getting those injuries back. So the eyes go to the transfer. Dante Dotto, who was extremely coveted in that 2023 class, had offers from across the country, goes to Oregon, looks good. In the limited sample size that you saw as a true freshman, I think a lot of work is going to go to Dante Dotto during the spring practice with some of the injuries that other running backs are going through. And that represents an opportunity for a guy like Dante to really take over that running back room. And again, similar to Gabe Ervin, this is a guy that is 215 pounds, has a track background, is a guy that I think largely is how Matt Rhule wants to run the football. And that's not necessarily a shot at Emmett Johnson, who I think provides some traits that are really appealing. And he's going to play for Nebraska in 2024. But you look at how Nebraska wants to run the football, it's a grind you down kind of style, right? What does he always say? 75 rushing yards in the fourth quarter, putting teams away. Gabe Ervin, Dante Dotto, I think puts you in that position, and two bruising running backs to be able to do that. So Dante Dotto, a guy that I'm certainly looking for to kind of break out in spring practice and maybe take over that running back room heading into the 2024 year. A lot of different storylines to be looking at. I think another one is the tight end room. I don't have many question marks about the secondary. I think that's going to be absolutely nails. I think it's just a question about who takes those starting jobs. Really healthy depth chart, a lot of competition in spring practice. And I think that's what fires me up the most and what I'll be keeping my eye on. Again, would love to hear two things. One, questions that you want to see answered from Nebraska. And then, do you have any answers right at that linebacker spot? Do you have any guys that you think break out, take over that linebacker room? Would love to hear from you guys. Appreciate y'all always rocking with the boys. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.